First of all, what is COI? Country conditions. COI stands for Country of Origin Information. It's the process of gathering and presenting information about the internal conditions of a country in order to provide evidence for the basis for asylum for a specific case. The law defines that you are trying to prove your client is unable or unwilling to return to or avail themselves of the protection of that country because of persecution or a well-founded fear of persecution on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. Country conditions evidence must be credible to the adjudicating officer, believable to them, specific and accessible. So credibility, there's a hierarchy of what adjudicators see as credible. Not surprisingly, the first, they are representatives of the US government. Their most credible resource tends to be US government country conditions reports, the Department of State country conditions reports, Department of Justice, EOIR. These are at the top of your hierarchy as far as what is believable and useful. Going down one, you have the United Nations. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees. You have the European Union, EUAA, EASO. These are asylum resources that the European Union produces. You have the Organization of American States and their IACHR, which are Inter-American Commission for Human Rights reports. WOLA is the Washington Office for Latin America. And again, for when Europeans experience a significant number of asylum seekers from an area, their individual country conditions reports can be very valuable. The UK, the Netherlands, Norway, Canada, these are all good resources. You also have your human rights organizations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Committee to Protect Journalists. RSF is Reporters Sans Frontières for journalists. MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, the Doctors Without Borders for medical personnel. These are all valid. Of course, going down the hierarchy, you have your international press, which we use a lot. New York Times, BBC, Guardian, Deutsche Welle, NPR, France 24, La Prensa, there are several. But you may also find articles and references in in-country press that is less known. Sometimes you may decide to use these. Sometimes they may guide your research specifically to dig a little deeper through these other resources to see if you can find references to these specific situations. It may also point to an area where you might be best to consider getting an expert witness to testify or write an affidavit to support a key part of your evidence that you have more difficulty finding credible resources for. Finally, academic publications. These are not less reliable, obviously. They can be extremely helpful. They need to be timely, pertinent, and also accessible, but they are good. Specific, number 2, credible, specific, accessible. Every case is different. Your client's case is a unique set of facts and should be considered on its own merit. So you will try and get evidence as close to the fact pattern as you can for your client. These should match, as you analyze the case, with the legal elements that you are going to use to argue that this individual or family merits asylum. You'll be looking at which of the 5 protected grounds are you using? Is the government an actor, or can at least has not been able to protect the individual from persecution? Is the persecution because of one or more of the 5 protected grounds? And also look at risk of return. Is it possible to relocate safely in the country of origin? If not, if you have good evidence for that, it's very helpful to include it. So we have credible, specific, accessible. Your job is to make this information as easily accessible to the adjudicator as possible. Make their job easier. So you're going to have an annotated table of contents. You will be creating a document in and of itself that tells a story. You will look at the layout. Don't assume that the individual, the adjudicator, is going to have time or interest in going and reading all of these articles. So you want to lay it out easily accessible. You look at the order. Most important, always first, but after that go from recent to the older articles, but always highlighting what do you really want to stand out? What do you want them not to be able to miss? Use quotes, convey critical points clearly, choose what to include and what to leave out. There may be a lot of information, but avoid what's not essential, what's biased, and especially if it's contradictory. Here's an example. This is page 1 of an actual redacted table of contents for Afghan country conditions evidence. You'll note the heading at the top. There is grave risk for physicians advocating for women through healthcare and family planning. And then the articles and resources that support that are listed most recent first. Note that we have quoted the substantial points we're trying to make and highlighted if they're particularly helpful. This is page 2. I think this was a 9-page document. Here you'll see a new heading right in the middle. This person's feminist convictions directly oppose the Taliban's anti-feminism. We use Department of State reports. Just 2 comments here. If you're doing a paper submission, you will be submitting hard copies. So be aware of how much of this document, maybe the whole thing, do you have to include, and make every document count. You can't add commentary. The document, the quotes you use should speak for themselves. You can't put in a paragraph explaining why this really means that this aspect of your client's case is important. It has to say that in so many words. So what are some of the tips that I would pass on to you? Besides keeping track of credible, specific, and accessible, always keep 2 time frames in mind. When any past persecution happened, and in some cases that may be years ago. You may have to go back 10, 15, 20 years to look at what was going on in the country at that time. But also look at what's going in now, because you're also arguing that should the individual have to go back to the country, they have a high likelihood of facing future persecution. Avoid anything that's contradictory. So you may find the perfect quote in a very credible article, but if the next line or next paragraph begins, some say it's not so bad, or others disagree, or in other parts of the country, or it may be that you do not want to be handing contradictory evidence to the other side. There are limits about using video, but transcripts are perfectly fine, or you can take screenshots if there's something you really can only find there. We talked about submitting paper applications and the disadvantage of overly long articles. Use the shorter of alternatives if they're available. Advocacy versus evidence. We are advocates. You're a lawyer, you are an advocate, but you're trying to provide evidence. So make sure you are looking at what has happened, what is happening, what do people say is likely to happen, not what should be done, what isn't happening that should. If you find a resource, but you're not familiar with the source, research it. You can find out a lot. What's the bias? What's the orientation? How credible are they? That will help you decide whether you use it or not. If there's an option to gift articles, if you are a subscriber, gift those, do anything you can to make it easy to use. And if you're using Google or any other search engine, don't just search all as you usually would, but always look in the news search option, because what you've come up with, besides being recent, is often very different than what you find if you're just doing the regular search. And finally, remember to search on different word combinations, different phrasing to express what you want to find out. You will get very different results. If you look at Afghan LGBTQ, you will get different results than if you look at gays in Afghanistan, or transgenders, transgender violence, or gender violence. Use as many combinations as you can to get what you need. And finally, take care of yourself. I know you've heard about secondary trauma. It can be particularly insidious because it's not always experienced while it's happening. It may not feel like you're being upset or affected at all. Particularly, I find myself doing country conditions research, it's a very analytical process. What I'm conscious of in the moment is using my analytical skills, my intellectual skills. I'm concentrating on researching, on focus on what's going to fit, how to present it. The reality is that's our conscious mind, but we're also taking in all of the evidence of some of the most atrocious things that can happen to human beings in our world. And we're distracted from that, but it's still affecting us. It's getting inside. It can raise our cortisol levels, our heartbeat. It can affect us in ways that we're not aware of. So I always tell people, don't wait until you feel something to take care of yourself. Do it as a matter of course. You can spend hours with country conditions research. It's not unusual. But when you're done, close it down, take a break, go for a walk, do something that feeds you. This is difficult work. It's challenging, but it's very important. What you do, the evidence you find, and how you present it can make a difference.
Hi, everyone. I just have a couple of quick points to add to Cindy's really helpful explanation of how to conduct country conditions research. So like Cindy mentioned, you really want your research and that table of contents to highlight the unique protected grounds that put your client at risk or perhaps led to persecution of them in the past. So you want this to be targeted. You want to separate your client from the pack of asylum seekers who are in this country applying for the same benefit. So I want to share with you a regulation that I frequently cite in asylum cases because it kind of highlights this point about targeting. So the regulation states that you do not have to show that your client will be singled out individually for persecution on account of a protected ground, so long as you can show that there is a pattern and practice of persecution of similarly situated people on account of one of the 5 protected grounds in their country. So, like, for example, say you have a race-based case. Say it's Kurds from Iraq, right? Kurds are discriminated against, persecuted in Iraq, and have been for quite some time. If you can demonstrate through your country conditions research that the Kurdish people have been systemically targeted, harassed, persecuted, tortured in Iraq, then you can satisfy that regulation pretty well, right? By showing that pattern and practice of persecution of people with the same racial background as your client. So it's helpful to keep that in mind, that specific targeting is what you're looking for, separating your client from the pack. It can also be helpful if you're lucky enough to find comparative language. So what I mean by this is you might find documentation that says, Afghanistan is the most dangerous country in the world for women. And maybe you're representing a women's rights activist from Afghanistan. That kind of comparative language is really, really helpful because, again, it separates your client from the pack of, hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers. Things to avoid. You want to avoid generalized violence descriptions. And what I mean by that is you'll find a lot of reports and evidence that talk about how dangerous a particular country is for a variety of reasons. A lot of times it's counterproductive to include that kind of information because, again, you're trying to prove that your client will be targeted for specific reasons and not because it's just a dysfunctional, poor, gang-ridden, violent country. The government really likes to deny cases on that kind of basis, saying that, the United States cannot be a haven for the entire world. A lot of countries across the world are very dangerous because the law has developed in such a way that asylum protection is only for people fleeing certain types of harm. So just be wary of those kind of resources that talk about generalized violence, because you don't want to include those. Lastly, as Cindy mentioned, you really want to read thoroughly everything you're going to submit to the government, because you don't want to include anything that could be counterproductive or harm your client's claim. So an example of this is pretty common for cases from the Northern Triangle. So that's El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. So in recent years, I found a lot of research that says, for example, rates of violence against women in these 3 countries are very high. However, in recent years, law enforcement has really stepped up and they're taking these domestic violence, sexual violence cases much more seriously than they have in the past. So conditions are improving. That's the kind of resource you do not want to include, even though that first part was helpful if it's a gender-motivated violence case. That first part's helpful, right? Talking about statistics and how rates are high. That second part is really unhelpful. So just be a scrutinizing reader as you go through these sources so that you can ensure that you help your client's case and you don't harm their case. Thanks for watching, and we're really grateful that you're helping us work on these cases.